Hello, I'm Eric Gensler, Capacity Interactive's founder and president. I'm a white man with brown hair, brown eyes, and wearing a blue and white seersucker button-down shirt, sitting in front of a large photograph of the Williamsburg Bridge. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of Muncie Lenape in Manhattan, New York. This session is being closed caption live. You can click the CC button in the video control panel to turn the captions on. There's so much going on in the world today for arts administrators getting back to in-person events, reopening venues, often with smaller teams, also managing lots of changes in the digital landscape. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. A major change in the digital marketing landscape is the release of Google Analytics 4, which we are here to talk about today. And I will soon be joined by two fantastic Capacity Interactive colleagues from our analytics team. But first, broadly, I want to share with you today's agenda. So first off, we're going to very briefly talk about why analytics is important for arts organizations. We know that all of you are at different levels in terms of your analytics expertise, so we want to make sure that there is a baseline understanding before moving forward. Second, we will offer a high-level overview of GA4 and what makes it different. This will not be an in-platform demo, but really just some highlights to help you understand more about GA4 and how it differs from past versions of Google Analytics. And then third, we will discuss the challenges and benefits of GA4, for which there are both many challenges and many benefits. And then finally, we will discuss making a plan to help you proceed towards implementing Google Analytics 4 at your organization. And if there is time at the end, we will address your questions, so please add them to the chat at any time. So I'd like to now invite Yosaif and Ali on screen to introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ali Duffey Cubilette. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior consultant here at Capacity Interactive. I am a white woman with blonde hair. I'm wearing large wireframe glasses. I have large headphones. I am wearing a leopard print blouse that's kind of a red-brown color, and I am sitting in front of a beige wall and a beige lamp, and I am coming to you from the traditional lands of the Muncie, Lenape, and Wappinger people in Upper Manhattan.
Hey, Eric. Hey, Ali. Hi, everyone. My name is Yosaif Cohain. I'm the Vice President of Analytics at Capacity Interactive. I've been at CI for a little over 7 years and feel really lucky to be part of this incredible community of arts marketers and arts administrators. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm a white man with short brown hair and a trimmed beard. I am wearing a blue and black checkered short sleeve shirt and sitting in front of white closet doors. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm coming to you today from northern New Jersey, which is the traditional land of the Muncie Lenape tribe.
Yes, so I'm glad someone trimmed their beard today. Could have done a better job with mine. So welcome. Thank you so much for your introductions. And I want to start off with our first question, which may be obvious, but it's important to ask. Why are we here today? Why are we here today talking about website analytics?
Always good to start big picture, I think. We spend so much time thinking about our programming and what's going on stage and in our exhibitions. And we spend then a lot of time talking about how we're going to market those programs and exhibits successfully. And I think that in our mind, the website really exists in this critical intersection of those two things. It's one of the first ways that many people will interact with your organization. And particularly in the last year when theaters and venues were closed, it may even be the only way that a lot of people were exposed to your organization and your brand. So not only is there that piece, but we know that websites are expensive to build and maintain. So it's a critical part of your audience's experience. And then it's also a key area of investment for organizations.
Right. And as we've been seeing websites becoming only more and more important, and we know how expensive they are to maintain, we know that we still have so many challenges with answering key questions about the website. How is it performing? What are people doing once they get there? How can I start making it better? These are challenges that many organizations are facing, and they're critical ones. We know how important the website is, and it's something that's going to drive organizational success. It's something that also is going to meet customer service, and we want to make sure we have great websites. But we have challenges answering these questions, and that's where web analytics can come in, and where we think of web analytics as this treasure trove that we are sitting on. We have so much amazing data at our disposal to be data-driven about the website and really learn more about how it's performing, how are people engaging with it, how are the features and content that we're adding to the site, how are they being absorbed and used by our patrons?
Absolutely. Yes, if you offer an analogy to put this into context for the physical non-digital world, do you want to share that?
Sure. If I were to go like in town to a local store and talk to the store manager or to the owner and ask them how many people came to the store last week, where were they from, did they purchase before, did they visit before, which aisles did they walk up and down, which products did they look at, they would not know how to answer those questions. They don't have that data, but they would love to, because then they could start thinking about in-store promotions and which products should we maybe get rid of, and how can I get more of the right people to my store, and maybe change the layout. Those are data points that they would love to have, but they don't. And we are so lucky because we get to have that for our website. We have exactly that type of data where we can start thinking about our website and how can I fine tune it and make it work for the way people are behaving with it. And that's really what Google Analytics is about. It is this data set that we have that is so rich and has so much amazing information that we can leverage to make informed decisions about the website. It's worth talking about analytics and what makes it so powerful. First and foremost, the data that we get in analytics comes in real time. So we can have a blog post or a website redesign that goes live or an on sale. We don't have to wait weeks or months for getting that data from some study. We can look at it in real time and see how users are engaging with that site. The data that comes into analytics is also highly accurate. Sometimes when we talk about data in analytics, we kind of nitpick at the small pieces that aren't looking right. But by and large, the data that we have in there, assuming a good implementation, of course, but the data is going to be highly accurate. Beyond that, the data is very granular, which might not be the sexiest way of describing things. But if you ask any analyst, we want to have data that is granular. We don't want to have just aggregate data. How is the website doing as a whole? We want to be able to go into the weeds when we need to. And oftentimes that's where real insights are going to be found, is in that granularity. So it's great that we have data that's coming in like that. The data set is going to be representative of all users. We are not looking at 10 people that are coming into a lab for a focus group at one particular date in time. We're not asking for a subset of people to fill out a survey. We are looking at data for everyone that's coming to the website. We can trend this out over time. So we have a much richer sample size as well. The methodology behind analytics, I would say, is just so incredibly powerful in that we are tracking natural behavior of people interacting with the website. We know that if we ask people to come into a research lab, they're going to act a little differently. They know they're being observed and monitored. They're not familiar with that computer. If we have a survey, it's going to be self-reported data, and there's some bias in there. We are tracking data behind the scenes. It's unobtrusive, it's private and anonymous, and we are able to track data that way for all of our users. And then I think it's important to mention, because it's easy to forget this, it's free. Google Analytics is an incredibly powerful platform that is free to us. And you can compare that with other web analytics platforms that can cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. If you were to do focus groups or other qualitative research, you'll have a cost associated with that. Web analytics through Google Analytics is free to us. And that's something that's really amazing.
Your enthusiasm about data has always been contagious, and granular data is very sexy. So I love that. Ali, you are a dashboard creation guru. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the benefits of a good Google Analytics setup and then visualizing the data.
Yeah, I love a good dashboard. Data visualization is my jam. If you're taking advantage of Google Analytics and you're collecting really robust data, you've set your KPIs, and you want to get started with how to analyze that. If you're familiar with Google Analytics, it can be pretty overwhelming, that interface, but you can take that data, you can export it, connect it to a data visualization platform like Google Data Studio, which is what we're looking at here, that allows you to build a much more user-friendly dashboard that's customized to your website and your KPIs, just getting rid of all of that clutter you see in Google Analytics and helping you, your team and your leadership focus on the things that matter most. So it's definitely one of the most powerful features and things you can do with good web analytics.
Awesome. So we know our website is crucial to our success. We know that web analytics is super powerful. So why do you think that so many organizations struggle with wrapping their arms around their web analytics?
Yeah, this is a question that I've been asking myself a lot over the years. It's one of the questions that we've been trying to solve for at CI. We get this feedback a lot from talking to clients. We see it in our benchmark study every time we run it, where we know organizations struggle with web analytics. And you all are living this on a daily basis, so you know this probably firsthand. But to share a little bit as far as the observations that we've been able to make as we've worked with dozens of clients, and we've had the privilege of partnering with them, and also seeing analytics setups for, I would say at this point, over hundreds of organizations. Some of the observations that we have, and maybe some of the misconceptions as far as data or some of the challenges and maybe some solutions around them. So first off is, of course, budget. And I don't think that limited budget is a misconception. I think it's an unfortunate truth too often. But I think the misconception sometimes can be that in order for me to have, to be able to make changes to my website, I need to have major budget. And if you're going through a website redesign, yes, you are going to need major budget for that. But oftentimes we can make optimizations to the website that don't require major investment, that don't require reaching out to some web design agency and creating an RFP and spending a major amount of money. That is oftentimes what we call iterative optimization, going after targeted areas of the website and making relatively smaller changes that can still be very impactful. And that's a process that is driven by data and by analytics. So again, if you don't have a ton of budget, there still is opportunity for making optimizations, and we should be leaning into analytics for helping make those changes. One of the other challenges I would say that we hear a lot about is that it's just very data heavy, and I am not a statistician. I went to liberal arts. I'm not, this is not for me. And I would say I'm in the same boat as well. I am not a statistician, and that's fine. You don't need to be a statistician to be good at web analytics. You need to be curious. You need to think about the website from a user's point of view. You need to think about the assumptions that you made when you were making decisions about the website, and have some data savviness and probably some training, but then you should just be able to go in and answer a lot of these questions. You don't need to build big statistical models in order to answer a lot of these questions and be more in tune with your website from a data point of view. The other area that we've, of course, worked a lot with many clients on is the technical piece of analytics. Google Analytics is software. That means that it requires technical know-how, and that is something that is not a misconception, but that is something that I think we've seen a lot of organizations struggle with, and a project that we work with clients on a regular basis. And my recommendation for this would be to find a partner, and CI could be a partner for you on this, as far as getting good data in place. The misconception might be that in order for me to get good data, it's going to be a major expense, and that's not always the case. So I think looking for a partner to take that part off of your plate. You should not need to be an expert in the technical piece of getting data into analytics. You should focus more on using the data that can live inside analytics. And we work with many organizations on that piece of analytics. And then lastly, I think one of the challenges, and this is also very real, is resources and time. And we know how many balls everyone has to juggle and how many hats they have to wear. And I can't fix this. But I think this is something that we just know how important our website is. We know we need to have a great website. And that just doesn't happen on its own. You have to be very intentional and you have to dedicate time for that. And I would just encourage everyone to try to carve out more time for that, to try to advocate a little bit more internally, because as we mentioned earlier, the website is an extension of your brand. And it is the touch point that so many people have with us. We need to have a great website.
And I would add to that, as we're going back to returning to more events, it's our storefront, it's our e-commerce platform. And so we know making changes to improve that can really help with earned revenue.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for all of that background. And now we've reached the meat and potatoes here to talk about Google Analytics 4 and how, like, what it is and how it is different from previous versions of Google Analytics. So Allie, why don't you start us off with the big picture?
Yeah, so big picture, GA4 is just the latest version of Google Analytics. The version that is the previous version, the current version for many folks, is what's called Universal Analytics, and that's been around since I think 2012. So it's getting up there in years in terms of technology. So GA4 is really built to respond to some of the critical new developments in the overall environment and landscape of websites. What does that mean? So first and foremost, it's built to measure websites alongside apps. And I know that may not be relevant for a lot of you. Not many of our clients have apps, but I think the real takeaway with that change is what Google's getting at is being able to track the user journey across different platforms within the same space. You used to have to measure your app very differently than you would measure your website, and GA4 attempts to combine those two things. Sort of similarly, GA4 uses the data that Google receives from people who've enabled ad tracking on their Google account to be able to connect the dots between me on my desktop and me on my mobile device. This was a feature that was recently added to Universal Analytics, but only in an individual report. And with GA4, it's really integrated into the overall solution.
Yeah, and it seems, Allie, like a lot of GA4 is just about the back end side of things as far as the engine that is driving GA4, and Google really leaning into machine learning for the platform. So we've all heard about cookies potentially going away or starting to go away and the scary cookieless future. Analytics has always relied on cookies in order to be able to track people. And GA4 will still rely on cookies when they're available, but when they're not available, it's going to use machine learning to fill those gaps. And that is something that is incredibly powerful, where the #1 company in the world, Google, is leveraging machine learning technology that they've built internally for other parts of their business. And we're integrating that into GA4. And the alternative could very easily be where things stay the same and Google says the dots aren't going to be connected and you need to build machine learning to connect those dots. We would not be able to do that. We are getting to use Google's infrastructure in order to do that. And one way that we're able to do that is with this new feature called predictive audiences. So GA4 is going to let us use its algorithms and define custom audiences that are going to be modeled based on behavior. So we can define custom audiences that are going to be first-time buyers, people that are going to add to the cart. GA4 is going to observe the behavior that leads to those kinds of conversions. And then it's going to say, here's an audience of people that are exhibiting the same type of behavior, but haven't yet converted. And what's great about these predictive audiences, GA4 integrates with Google Ads. So now we can target these audiences that are predicted using machine learning.
You do have to meet some audience and site traffic thresholds to enable those features, but GA4 is only recently out of beta, and who knows where that will go next. I think that with all of these changes, Google's really trying to accomplish a couple things. One is just a better picture of user behavior, whether that is across platforms, apps, and websites, or across devices. And the other thing, of course, as Yosaif mentioned, is just a really future-proof analytics solution.
Couple questions in the chat before we just go on. I know they're normally at the end, but I think it'll be quick to answer. Someone asked, are machine learning and AI the same thing? And what is machine learning? I think that would be helpful to just give a quick definition.
So I can say that I'm not a machine learning or AI expert. That's not what CI does. a lot of the direction that the world has been going in with big technologies, if we're talking about self-driving cars and my sister who's a PhD in genetics and solving for things like that, it's taking data sets and applying algorithms to them, and the algorithm training itself and correcting itself using data over time. I don't believe machine learning and AI are the same thing. They're slightly different. I cannot give you what the distinct differences between the two. But basically, it's saying Google's technology of processing data, and just think of how much data Google's sitting on. They have built algorithms, and they've built more than algorithms. They've built technology that improves algorithms over time, and they're extending that into our data now.
I think for an example of this cross-device tracking, so Google knows a certain subset of the data. They know that through the people enabling that ad tracking feature in their Google account, they know that this person is me on desktop and this traffic is me on my mobile device. And they have a subset of that data that they know. And then they're taking the rest of the visits to the site and kind of extrapolating from that what's a reasonable amount of overlap between those two things. So that's kind of how it would work in function in practicality in this actual example.
Great. Thanks for answering that. So we were listing the many changes of what GA4 is, and we listed a lot, but I know there's a lot more. So Yosaif, keep us going.
Sure. So let's go a step further down in the rabbit hole and talk about some more specifics of how GA4 is different. And one of those big areas is going to be the data model. GA4 uses a completely new data model for how we're capturing data. If we look at universal analytics, and if we're referencing in this webinar just GA, we're referencing universal analytics. That's the current version of Google Analytics that almost everyone is using. The way we collect data over here is in a session-based model where for each session we have three main ways of collecting data. One's going to be the page view tag. As soon as a user gets to a page on the site, we fire a page view tag. That tells analytics which page they got to, also how much traffic we got to the website, how many page views, what their bounce rate was, how they got to the site. That's the core of universal analytics, is the page view tag. And then there's two additional types of tags. There's an event tag. If we want to collect more behaviors on the website outside of users going to certain pages, scrolling through carousels, downloading PDFs, playing embedded video, which I would highly recommend that we track that type of behavior, we do that with what's called an event tag. And then lastly, if someone purchases, we have a transaction tag. And yes, that data is collected in our ticketing platform. We want that data to live in Google Analytics as well, so we can understand when someone's purchasing a membership or a subscription or single tickets, we can see the behaviors that lead to that purchase. So that's the current version, Universal Analytics, three different types of tags. GA4, everything is an event tag. We only have events. That means that we can collect the same type of data. We can still track things like page views and like transactions, but they're all going to live as event tags. So instead of it being a page view tag, it would be a page view event tag. Everything now is an event. That means that the implementation is going to look very different. It also means that we're going to have some new data definitions and new metrics at our disposal, and some are going to actually go away. And we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later.
In the scenario that Yosaif is describing, and if it wasn't a page view and it wasn't a transaction, you would have to customize that. You would have to build that yourself. One of the real benefits of GA4 is that a number of those additional engagements, those events, are available out of the box, and you can automatically enable them in the admin settings of GA4. So those include scrolling, file downloads, clicking an outbound link, a link that takes you away from the website, and video engagement, specifically YouTube video engagement. So I know a lot of our clients use Vimeo, and that is not an automatic feature, but YouTube is. The other kind of in the weeds feature of GA4 that I think a lot of people in the nerdy analytics community have gotten really excited about is that it automatically integrates with Google's cloud-based data warehouse called BigQuery. So once you enable that connection, BigQuery allows you to both store the data and then perform advanced analysis on the data using the programming language SQL. So that can give you some access to some really advanced kinds of analyses of the data. It used to be that you would only be able to connect your Google Analytics to BigQuery if you paid for Google's very premium version of Google Analytics, which when I say very premium, I mean over $100,000 a year premium. It's definitely one of the more advanced features, but something that has a lot of potential and you can do some really cool things with.
Great. So there's some big changes and a really solid overview. I want to add, we can add a little more complexity and insight by talking about some of the challenges with GA4. So Yosaif, why don't you kick us off telling us the challenges of GA4, which I know there are a number of.
Yeah, there are many. So buckle in, everyone. I would say that there's 3 buckets or 3 categories of challenges with GA4, as Ali and I have been really working in the platform a lot over the past few months. 1 has to do with how we collect the data. 2 would be more of like how we access that data. And I would say the 3rd one is like where that data lives and the implications on that. So let's start off and talk about the technical piece. And I would say GA4 is very technical to get set up properly. If Universal Analytics is technical, GA4 is that on steroids. It is a lot tougher to get up and running with good data. One aspect as far as the technical piece and getting that tracked properly has to do with removing personally identifiable information. That is just one of the key pieces of web analytics over the years. We do not want to capture PII, personally identifiable information. It might be in violation of our terms of services. It is something we want to be good stewards of the internet. We don't want to collect personally identifiable information. We want the data to be private and anonymous. Collecting PII is also in violation of Google's policy. So we cannot collect this data. And Google doesn't really care if we're doing this intentionally or accidentally. If you're collecting PII, you are violating that policy. The most common way that we've seen clients collect PII over the years has been in the form of email addresses. You are not doing that intentionally, but Google considers email addresses to be PII. And oftentimes, if you go to reset your password and you click on that link and it takes you to the site, your email address is in that URL. You are capturing in Google Analytics the URL and you are collecting PII. In Universal, the way we get rid of that data is in the admin interface. It's a little technical, but it's possible to do it like that. GA4, we lose that ability to get rid of it in the interface. We have to do that through code in Google Tag Manager, the platform that we use for deploying the solution for capturing the data. So that requires a custom solution where you're going to need to write code or partner with someone that's going to help you do that. And I would say, just like with Universal Analytics, where you probably are going to want some help from a partner, I think same thing with GA4. Things like this, you're going to need some help in getting that code up and running and removing that PII. Next on the list is capturing e-commerce data. I mentioned in Universal Analytics, we have that transaction tag. In GA4, we don't have that transaction tag. We need to do some more advanced work in GTM, to map the data layer, the information that our ticketing platform is providing to GTM, and be able to map that properly before sending it into GA4. So it's going to require a few additional steps that are somewhat technical in order to capture e-commerce data.
Hopping on with a few more challenges. Obviously, one of the key things that we are hoping to get out of our website analytics is where on the site are people going? What pages are they visiting? With GA4, Google has made an interesting choice in that the dimension that you will look at in your engagement reports to see what pages people are going to uses the page title. And that can be really problematic for some clients and for some organizations and for some websites when those things aren't unique and they don't actually describe the page that somebody is on. We've definitely seen the URL and particularly the part of the URL after your domain be the best way to look at page performance. And that's kind of hidden. It's not the default and it's not easy to clean up. So you can end up with a lot of different duplicate instances of those where you are looking at your UTM codes, your campaign tracking codes with the question marks in the URL and all of that information that comes after it. And so again, it just makes that analysis a little bit more challenging. Kind of relatedly, the campaign reports, the acquisition reports that are in GA4 do a similar thing where it's challenging to look at what pages people are going to. And that I think is one of the most interesting things to look at for a campaign. You know, you run this campaign, people are landing on your website, but not only how many pages are they visiting, but what pages are they visiting? How are they browsing? I think that's a really important thing to analyze and something that is a little bit more challenging to get at in GA4 the way that it is set up currently. Also, if you've worked with us ever or attended one of our webinars, you know how much we love content groupings. So this was a feature in the admin settings of Universal Analytics that would allow you to categorize the pages on your site. We would use this a lot for what section of the site is somebody going to? Are they going to the About Us, the support pages, the calendar page, so on and so forth? Or you could use it to analyze what templates are people using the most, or how are people using those templates? So that kind of aggregate analysis is really, really helpful when we're looking at overall performance, and particularly when we're looking at how to focus our attention and make those kind of iterative optimizations that Yosaif was talking about at the beginning. There is in GA4, if you go into the engagement report, there is kind of a phantom content groupings thing that you'll see, but it's not a feature that they fully built out yet, which is just wild to us, and I think a lot of the analytics community. So we've come up with a solution that enables you to send that data, but again, it's a little bit more advanced to do right now with the features that Google has rolled out at this point.
Yeah, and I think one additional challenge to hop on for everyone is the need to customize your solution. This is similar to Universal Analytics, but we need to add additional events. Ali had mentioned earlier that we can track some automatic events like people clicking on exit links or playing YouTube videos. But just like we have rich websites, content-rich websites, and we're adding unique features and functionality, we want to have data-rich solutions. And we really want to be intentional about behavior that we want to capture that will inform decision-making. If you're adding a hero that slides on the homepage, we want to track, are people scrolling through it? If you're adding a carousel, if you're adding a slideshow, if you're adding embedded SoundCloud, those are kinds of things where we want to make sure we are collecting that data. And that requires some technical know-how as far as collecting that data.
And then beyond collecting accurate and robust data, we found that can also be quite challenging to access that data in the GA4 reporting interface. If you're familiar with Universal Analytics, you know there are a plethora of reports that are available out of the box in that interface. Here is a list of them. There are over 90 different reports. And you know, that actually might be too many. It can be overwhelming in its own right to have that many options and be like, where do I go for this information? So I think Google responded to that and went the exact opposite direction. And if you look at the GA4 interface, there are like 12 reports that are populated there out of the box. So much more minimal. Google Analytics 4 also has launched this feature called Analysis Hub, and this is really where they are encouraging everyone to build their own reports. So Google knows they were trying to solve for many different solutions, and it was unsustainable in Universal Analytics, and they're saying, scratch that, you can do it yourself, which is helpful in some regards, but also then that's labor that you have to do to set up those reports and access the data that you need for your particular website.
And it's not, Ali, just the reporting interface that is minimal. It's also the admin interface, and something we touched on a little before. Adding content groupings, like you said, that used to be in the admin interface of Universal. We have to do that with code. Applying filters, which we often need to do in Universal Analytics to clean up the data a little bit. Adding the domain name to the page name is a little bit of a technical piece that you need to do in Universal. We can't do that in GA4. So all of that filtering, creating a new view doesn't exist if people have multiple views with their GA. All of that is gone. There is an admin interface, but it's very minimal as far as how you can process the data.
And then the third kind of bucket that we're talking about with challenges, it says migration, not an update. So what that means is when you get started with GA4, you are creating a totally new property that will start collecting data from that date forward. all of your historical data will continue to live as it has in your universal analytics property, and all of your new data on GA4 will be somewhere else. So that definitely creates some challenges when you're trying to analyze trends, do year-over-year comparisons. So just one of the additional challenges there.
So lots of challenges, lots of benefits, but before this. So I want to zoom out again and say, why are we talking about GA4? Is this something that marketers, arts marketers, should start using? What are your thoughts on all of that?
There are definitely some things that are better. We also know that this is just out of beta, and there's more on Google's roadmap, so there's more to come in terms of features. But just to zoom in on a couple of the new measurements and metrics that I think are really interesting. The first is that GA4 has a much more sophisticated concept of engagement. In Universal, our primary metric of engagement has been bounce rate. So this is the rate of people coming to your site, viewing just one page, and then they leave, they bounce, which, it's really non-engagement. So that's kind of a glass half empty version of looking at things. It's also incomplete in a lot of ways, because you can have a very rich landing page, lots of video, about the artists, all kinds of information. So you could be landing people there. They could be spending a lot of time there exploring everything about the show, and they could leave. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think in some ways bounce rate is it's definitely not giving you that complete picture. In GA4, we have a measurement called engagement rate. So this looks at people who view more than one page, who stay on a single page for more than 10 seconds. So that would capture that example that I just gave of a really rich landing page. Or if somebody does something that we have deemed important, we have created an event to track it, we have marked it as a conversion, we've said it's a really significant interaction. So if somebody does one of those things, all of those behaviors will count towards an engaged visit to your site and go into your engagement rate. So it's a more positive framing, and it's definitely a more complete one as well.
Yeah, and one of the other metrics that in Universal Analytics lives under behavior next to bounce rate, which we don't use, is time spent. Anyone that's been on a training call with me over the years, anyone that's seen me present on webinars or at boot camp, you've heard me rant about time spent in Universal Analytics because it is inaccurate. The way Universal Analytics collects time spent on the website is looking for differences in timestamps. So what that could look like is if I come to the site and I view the homepage for 10 seconds and I click to go to the production detail page and I spend 3 minutes there and then I leave, my time spent for my session is captured as 10 seconds, not 3 minutes and 10 seconds, because it's not including the last page of my session. I could also be on search on Google and I can open your site in a new tab and not navigate there for another 20 minutes and then begin my session. The clock starts going as soon as you open the site, as soon as you open the other tab. GA4 has a much better methodology for collecting time spent data. So first off, it's only going to run the clock if your tab or your screen is in view. So if I navigate away, it will pause the clock. It won't start until I actually go back to that tab. Furthermore, it's going to keep sending the data on a regular basis back to the platform. So if I'm in that example I mentioned before of 10 seconds on the homepage, 3 minutes on a PDP on a production detail page, and then I leave, it might not capture my session exactly as 3 minutes and 10 seconds, but it's going to be pretty close to that because it's going to be sending the data regularly back to GA4. So it might be 3 minutes and 9 seconds or 8 seconds. It's going to be a lot closer. So we right now never report on time spent metrics at CI. We tell clients don't use it. It's not accurate. Moving forward, it is going to be accurate. And I think that's going to be a great new metric and something that we're going to have to wrap our heads around as far as how do we analyze it and interpret it, but at least it's going to be accurate.
Yeah, one of the other really great benefits of GA4 is that we have a lot more flexibility to control and send really granular data to Google Analytics. Say you want to track somebody engaging with a video. This would be an event like we were talking about before. In Universal, you have 3 bits of information that you can send with your event. You've got an event category, event action, and event label without additional, more advanced setup. So if I'm talking about that video example, my category might be video, my action might be play, and my label might be video name. But there's a lot more you might want to track. You know, the genre of the work featured, the artist, the length, the player. Is it YouTube or is it Vimeo? The season it's a part of. You know, there are so many different options, and you have the capability to send that even more granular data with GA4. So in Google Analytics 4, you can send up to 25 different custom parameters, bits of information along with each different event, which just gives you so much more, so many more options on what you can analyze and how you can analyze what people are engaging with and how.
Yeah, and we want to show an example also of a new feature of GA4, the new e-commerce report. If you are in Universal Analytics, you might have this if you have like enhanced e-commerce. I would say of the hundreds of setups that I've seen, maybe one or two have had this. So my guess is that you don't. Rather than just looking at e-commerce as a function of are people purchasing individual products, we have the ability now to look at, are they viewing that detail page? Are they adding that product to the cart? So e-commerce is a much richer model now, and we have new metrics we can look at. Not just are people purchasing this product as a way of gauging demand, but are they going to that product's detail page? Of the people that go to that detail page, how many of them are going to add it to the cart, or how many of them are going to purchase it? And now we can start playing around with maybe the messaging on the landing page is a little bit off. Maybe there's some pricing things we want to adjust. We have more information as far as how are people engaging with our products beyond just are they purchasing it.
Absolutely. Thank you for all of that. And I see some of the questions coming in, which I think will be answered by this next question, which is you gave a lot of the pros, you gave a lot of the cons, and now we can get to how we think arts organizations should proceed with Google Analytics 4.
Sure. I think GA4 still has a lot of work to do, and Google has said that they're going to be improving it. And frankly speaking, if I was the product manager at Google, I would not have taken this thing out of beta. I think the data inside GA4 is coming in really well. I think the interface is really clunky and hard to use, and I think they need to make lots of improvements there. That being said, I do believe we should be embracing GA4. Google has made it very clear this is the future for their analytics platform. If we're using past experience as an indicator of what's going to happen, they are not going to take Universal Analytics away. It's going to keep working, but Google is not going to add any innovation. They're not going to spend any time towards Universal. Everything is going to be going towards GA4. So over time, Universal Analytics is going to start withering away. And the sooner we embrace GA4, the sooner we learn how to think about this new data, how to navigate through this interface, the better. We also want to start collecting data in there so that we have a historical data set. We start training that machine learning algorithm. It needs data in order for that to happen. So the sooner we get going with that, the better.
I think the most important thing for arts organizations to do right now is to make a plan. You know, it will be a process to transition all of your analysis to GA4. It will be a journey. Maybe now is not the moment if you're in the middle of launching a season or if you're short-staffed. Mm-hmm. But some organizations may be able to tackle it sooner rather than later. And in fact, we've already worked with a few clients on setting up GA4, which is how we've learned everything that we are talking about today. So we wanted to give you a sense of what that timeline could look like. So here we are, visualization of the transition to GA4. You are here. Universal Analytics is your only data source. In a phase one, so that's, you know, now to 12 months, say, we want to start thinking about getting in place a basic setup in GA4. This includes page view, e-commerce, removing personally identifiable information, as Yosaif mentioned earlier, enabling those automatically collected events, perhaps. And that'll run in parallel with your existing Universal Analytics solution. That gives you time to learn yourself about this new interface, the new data model. It gives you time for training and practice. It also gives you a chance to compare the data you're seeing in Universal Analytics right now to what you see in GA4. So that can help like tease out some of those differences between the two things. Next phase, probably a couple years, would be running in parallel GA4 maybe starting to become your primary data source, leaning on it more, you're getting more comfortable with it. So that I think as Google is rolling out more features, it's becoming more useful, more usable. That's probably the next 1 to 2 years. And then phase 3, of course, probably not for a few years now. GA4 will be your only data source. You'll be super comfortable in that platform. It'll have better data. It'll have all those machine learning features. And you can probably then at that point get rid of the tags on your website for Universal. But of course, Universal will still be where all of your historical data is housed. So it's important to keep it there for any kind of analysis you might want to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to have a plan for GA4 as a product, but I think equally as important is to have a plan for just analytics, because analytics is about a mindset and it's a process and it's a continuum and it's something where we have to keep investing in. So yes, we need to have a plan for GA4, but again, and kind of like wrapping us back to where we were at the beginning, we need to be better at our websites. And for that, we need to be better at analytics in many ways. And we should have a plan for doing that. So I would say starting off just with an audit of your data and how it's coming in right now. Do we have the data points that we need? Is it being collected accurately? Can I trust this data before I start relying on it for decision-making and for reporting? And if the answer is no, fixing it, coming up with a solution to fix the data that's coming in. Once you've gone through that audit and verified you have good data, defining KPIs. There is a ton of data that lives in Google Analytics, whether it's Universal or GA4. Not all of it is as important as the other. I think a really fun and healthy exercise is to ask yourself, why do we even have a website? And the answers to that question are going to be how you define your site objectives. And then once we've defined and come to consensus, this is why we have that website and we're all on the same page, what are the metrics that best help us measure those objectives? And those are our KPIs, our key performance indicators, our most important metrics that we want to be looking at regularly. So that leads us to the next one. You have KPIs defined, build a dashboard, do yourself a favor and automate that stuff. We don't want to spend our time inefficiently by recreating the same report every week or every month. Build it out once. We love using Google Data Studio. It's another free platform from Google, and it lets us visualize the data and connect to Google Analytics and build dashboards that we can automate. You can even automatically send them to people's inboxes on specific days of the week or of the month and be more familiar with how the website's performing. Once you've done that and you've freed up some of your time, I think you could start tackling some basic analyses, just being curious about the website. How are people behaving on the homepage? What are our most popular pages of the website? How are different traffic sources performing for us? Start small. You don't have to take on everything at once. You can do bite-sized individual analyses. Just again, being curious. We added this new feature to the site. How are people behaving with it? And build on that over time. Of course, anytime you're having a bigger initiative with the website, usually that's going to be a website redesign. But if you're making changes like your information architecture, your global nav, you're adding new types of content, you want to use data to inform those decisions. That is user-centric design. We want to represent users in that process so that we're not designing for ourselves as stakeholders, we're designing for users and for people. And that's where Google Analytics really shines brightest, when we are using that data to represent users in the process. So any big initiative that's going on, try to incorporate data into that process. Once you've done all these, and I would say this is going to take some time, but if you want to get even more advanced, you can start thinking about adding qualitative data. So that could be screen recordings, that could be surveys or little polls on the site. We love using Hotjar, really powerful platform. I think it's hotjar.com/nonprofit. You can get a free business account as a 501c3, and you can do screen recordings like that. You can have little polls on the site to gauge satisfaction or to ask people individual questions. But that is something that I would say is not instead of analytics, it is on top of Google Analytics as a complementary data source and another input. And then lastly, if you want to really go to the next level, which is a big opportunity for the arts of this, A/B testing is a way of taking action and testing out hypotheses from a data-driven point of view for an iterative optimization. Google Optimize, yet another platform from Google. We love Google. It is a free platform and a really powerful one for running A/B tests on the website.
Thank you for all that. We love Hotjar and doing projects around Hotjar. A/B testing projects are so fun, especially when we get a test that works, which is, sometimes they don't work. That's okay. So let's see. Where should people go? We're going to get to questions, and there's a few questions that we didn't cover. If our audience wants to learn more about GA4, what can they do?
Yeah, so we wrote a blog post that kind of is high level, very similar to what we just went through. So a lot of the information is there. Of course, this webinar, the CI to I Live, will stay on our YouTube page, so you can always return to it and forward it and watch it again. And then also, maybe we'll do something at bootcamp about GA4. So stay tuned for more about that.
I think you can count on that. Well, Yosaif, Ali, thank you so much. We're going to get to questions here. Let me jump over. Someone asked, is GA4 fully connected to Data Studio?
Yes, sort of. So there is a connection to Data Studio. I've noticed that there are definitely some dimensions and things that aren't in there yet. So it's still being built out. So yes and no.
Right. Let's bang through these. Is GA4 principally a response to cookies going away?
In many ways, yes. I think it's the evolution of Google Analytics, but then a big driver behind this is with cookies going away with time and having a solution ready for that.
Yeah. Is it safe to assume you get a new customer ID for GA4 that's separate from your UAID?
I'm assuming a new client ID, because customer ID, I'm assuming it's more like on the CRM. Do you get a new client ID? I believe the answer is yes. It's a new type of ID for that user. I think, Ali.
I think so as well. And I would also note that I could get multiple user client IDs over time just because that's based on cookies. I'm assigned a client ID when I come to the site for the first time. And if I clear my cache, that'll go away and I'll get a new one. So those are like iffily reliable.
There was a question, what if this is about PII, what if a Tessitura ID is stuffed into a URL? Is that a PII violation?
Interesting. I feel like this is rapid fire, by the way.
I know, you're doing great.
Thank you. I think there's a little bit of debate in the analytics community about customer IDs. I don't know that necessarily violates Google's policy. I don't believe it does, in fact. They once even had a part of Google Analytics that was specific for capturing user IDs. The challenge, I would say, with capturing those IDs is that if we want to be a little more nefarious, like we can now go and pull the data from tests or from our ticketing platform and merge it, and that might be a little bit iffy. So I think it depends on how you use it.
I know that GA4 is also set up to dedupe users based on their login IDs as well as their client IDs that are created by Google Analytics itself. So that is a method that Google encourages folks to use to create that connection across the user journey. I think it's embraced more by e-commerce platforms, and I have to log into my Sephora account and those kinds of scenarios. But I think there's definitely potential for tests and thinking about how do we maybe get people to log in earlier so that we can use that information in that way. I think that's a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The rapid fire continues. How do your recommendations change if preparing for a website redesign?
Recommendations as far as implementing GA4?
Yeah, I guess around the timeline, would you start with GA4? Would you even bother with Universal Analytics?
Interesting. I think for me, it would depend a little bit on the specifics, but depending on your timeline, if you're about to launch a new website in a couple of weeks, I would say don't do anything. If it's like further down the road, it still might make sense to do a quick GA4, like what we would call like a core implementation. Just get it up and running with like the most important pieces, because you want to start building that historical data set. And then once you have the new site launch, I would say customize that thing a little bit more.
Good, Ali. So let's see. Any recommendations on how to clean up, improve universal data so that year-over-year comparisons can be more seamless once moved to GA4?
Sort of. I have an idea. Ali, I don't know if you have one.
No, go for it.
Okay. I think it depends, but one of the really powerful features of universal analytics is custom segments. So we've worked with custom segments in analytics as a little bit of like a hack of getting around data issues that existed in the past. So most things in universal analytics are only going to work from now moving forwards. Custom segments work retroactively. So if I know that I had a certain issue in the past and I want to work around that, I can kind of create a custom segment that gets around it. I would say it gets messy pretty quickly, and it's challenging, and it depends on what you're trying to work around. I don't know if that necessarily answered the question, but that would be where my head goes.
There was another question in the chat about if there is a way to migrate universal analytics data into GA4, and the answer to that is no. No. And the reason for that is because is sort of technical, in that the data is just structured differently. And I think to the question that we had last as well, a lot of times when universal, we are looking at sessions, we are looking at bounce rate. And as we mentioned, you don't have either of those metrics in GA4. So you're just looking at different metrics. So it is going to be challenging to compare year over year. And honestly, since this is just out of beta, I'm sure there will be some guidance and some consensus in the analytics community about how best to do that. But I think everybody's still in the process of learning and transitioning and starting to collect data. And we might be able to answer that better in a few months.
Join us at boot camp.
Yeah.
Final question, asking for any reference materials for auditing your data.
I would give a couple. One would be in universal analytics, look at the bounce rate first off. That is one of the things where it's such an indicator of whether or not your data is good. So if you have a bounce rate that's like way too low, and I would say under 20%, probably means you have an implementation issue. If it's way too high, and I would say over 70%, that probably means you have some kind of issue. If you're working with multiple domain names, that means you are highly likely to have some kind of challenge, because cross-domain tracking is tricky. So that might be an area to explore a little bit more. There's a tool called GA4 and that will crawl your website and make sure that you have Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics on every page. So you can go there and enter your URL, and it will crawl your website and tell you if all pages have, because you want to make sure you have tracking on every page. Those would be where I would start. Obviously, if you have e-commerce tracking in place, you can pull data from your ticketing platform and pull data from GA and compare like orders against each other and see that they're matching up with a high level of accuracy.
Great. Well, thank you for these fantastic questions. Thank you, Ali and Yosaif, for your thoughtful answers. Thank you for all the work you put into putting this together. Not only Ali and Yosaif, but our fantastic team, our marketing team, our design team, our operations team, our consulting team. We all work very, very hard to put these together for you and provide high quality content. So all of you watching, thank you. Ali and Yosaif, thank you for being the faces of this today. And for everybody out there, good luck with GA4. I know it's so much to manage in addition to all of the other changes that you are managing in the world right now. We are here to help and support. So thank you. I know you're very busy too, and choosing to spend your afternoon with us. Amazingly, when this started, we kept the same number of people watching towards the end. And I was like, these are our people. These are our nerds. So thank you for nerding out with us today. And really appreciate you being here. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you,
Eric.
Bye.